Welcome to the quick view of the portrait painting process of Varvara. This is day one and I am just focusing on blocking in the portrait. First, finding the position of the larger masses of her hat as well as the portrait. Once I have this context in place, I now bring in the area of the eyebrows and eyes as well as some indication to the position of the nose. This is the first painting day, and while I have a variation of colors on my palette, I actually ended up using just the combination of raw umber and Indian red, which is a earth red, and this then renders a rather pink, brown, warm, monochromatic underpainting. By using this single color, I am focusing on the element of the drawing as pertains to the gesture and proportion, shadow shape, light shape, as well as finding the configuration of the features within the framework of the portrait. I use a variation of painting tools, including a bundle of brushes with a variation of shapes and sizes and hairs. So some of the smaller, more finely pointed brushes are great for studying the intricacy of the drawing, whereas I use slightly larger brushes for massing in larger areas in a quick and effective way. I'm also using some Q-tips in order to rub out areas where I don't want to have paint, so in order to bring some of these passages lighter, and also a barbecue skewer in order to scrape into the wet paint to find some element of the drawing in that way. This is the beginning of the second painting day, where I first began massing in the darkest dark as is situated in the area of the hat, as well as the blouse and the scarf, and I also start to indicate the element of the background so that the combination of the black and the background can provide a context for the further development of the portrait. Before the second painting day is concluded, I also mass in the larger planes of the portrait, beginning with the darkest dark as conveyed by her shadow shape in the area of the cheek and the cheekbone, so positioning in those darkest notes. I can also now gauge the relative position of the lightest light, followed by the transition of halftones that are connecting these darkest zones to the area of the light. In this initial block-in, I am thinking about the big impression and how to quickly obtain the expression of the larger masses and the larger blocks of structure and planes within the portrait. Before concluding this painting day, I go into the area of the eyes and the nose with a second pass to push out a little bit more subtlety of the form in these areas. As some of these subtle transitions are created, the sense of three-dimensionality is further elevated and the portrait starts to develop into more of a realistic representation of nature. I am using a variation of brushes in order to juggle a variation of color and values as I am working in these areas. Now that I'm going into the area of the mouth, I first block in the larger planes of the top and the bottom lip, and I also use the corners of the mouth to help orient the position of the mouth relative to the overall proportions of the portrait. Initially, the mouth was just planted in a rather blocky position, and now that I am integrating the contour of the lips to the surrounding light shape of the portrait, the mouth starts to appear a bit more realistic also. Since the paint is active in this area, I decided to push the area of the mouth as well as the chin to a conclusive stage before I change location in the portrait and shift gear and go back into the area of the nose and the eyes. I also take an opportunity to revisit the contour and the edge of the portrait on one side in order to bring out a little bit more temperature fluctuation in that area, as well as developing the relative degree of softer edge in that contour. In the zone where the contour of the portrait is in direct connection to the yellow of the background, I found it particularly interesting and pleasing to push a lot of purple undertones in the flesh tones to be a complementary color contrast to the yellow of the background. Now that I return my focus into the area of the nose and the eyes, I also push a slightly darker note into the shadow shape in this area and allow this also to domino effect into the transitional halftones, and pushing these zones also a little darker. And though the variation is not dramatic, it is noticeable that the lightest light is pushed slightly lighter with the development of the highlight, and the darkest darks are pushed darker with the development of the shadow shape and the darker halftones. And by pushing the potential value scale slightly in a more contrasted position, I now have also more range to work with that in turn help to bring out more sense of volume and three-dimensionality. Another thing that assists for this endeavor is the subtlety of shape designs that find themselves in between transitions between the dark and the light. And so the transitions are now less choppy and much more subtle, and this creates more of a soft gradient of color and values as these plane flow across the form. In a final and conclusive round to the development of this portrait, I revisit the area of the eye on the light shape side and also create some final touch-ups in the area of the mouth. And this concludes the portrait painting process of Varvara. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope that you found this quick view helpful.